The sun hangs deep above Lexington, Kentucky, throwing golden glows down the streets. Executive Mark Anderson set up a rearview mirror while sitting in a police car and sloppy, searching for traffic in front of lead. His partner, Emily Carter, typed her pen against her notepad and raised observations from her previous phone. They were parked near Ashland Avenue. There, the neighborhood was switched from a modest single-family home to a luxury condominium. Mark's eyes then closed in a slim black vehicle that had passed them. A driver, an African-American woman in a dark blue suit made by a tailor, had her hair styled properly. Your attitude was upright and balanced. Something about the way she was wearing it seemed to inspire Mark. "Look at it," he muttered, his tone dripping with light empty. "Expansion vehicle. I'm sure she has something in mind." Emily looked up from her notes. "It will not accelerate or break the law," she replied carefully. "What's the problem?" Mark ignored her and grabbed the flashing light. "Let's find out," he said with a smirk, driving down the street behind the car. The driver slowed down and signaled before driving to the street. Her movements were intentionally and mostly practiced. Emily noticed that her shoulders were slightly stiffer from the rear window as Mark parked and left the police car. "Mark, I feel that's not right," Emily whispered as she calmed down. "You don't even have a possible cause." "Back, rookie!" He grabbed Mark, his hands roaming his holster. "I've been doing this for 20 years. When I know the suspect." As they approached, the windows dropped down and revealed Grace Williams. Her expression was calm but cautious. Her dark eyes appreciated the two officers with gentle determination. "Good evening, officer," Grace said evenly. "Are you having a problem?" Mark leaned forward. His shadow fell into the interior of her car. "License and registration," he barked, ignoring her question. Grace's hands moved carefully, calling up the document and placing it on the dashboard before pushing them away. Emily looked carefully and realized that Grace's fingers were weak. Her instinct told her that something wasn't exposed to Grace, it was Mark. His actions have shifted from everyday life to unnecessary, positive change. "What took you to this part of town, Mr. Williams?" Mark asked as he sharply searched her documents with his sound. Grace took care of her head lightly and continued to measure her voice. "I'm on my way to a meeting." His lips rolled over. "It has to be a meeting where you drive a car like this." Emily felt the shape of the node in her stomach. The tension was thick, and passers-by noticed interaction. She stepped closer to Mark, her voice slowing down. "Mark, she'll work together. Please don't let us escalate." However, Mark had already pulled the driver's door handle. "Get out of the car," he ordered, a grip around the door and closed it. Grace's tranquility was stagnant for a while. "Is there a reason for this?" she asked, but calmed down. "I said that," he groaned at Mark, tearing the door apart. Grace filled her seatbelt and her movements deliberately stepped onto the sidewalk. Emily's mind competed when she saw Mark Grace's arm gripping with unnecessary strength and pulling her towards the side of the car. Grace tripped slightly and caught the door frame. "That's enough!" Emily burst into play. Her voice trembled, but she kept the floor. "She did nothing wrong." Mark saw it. "Stay, rookie." Grace oversaw her jacket and smacked Mark's glare head. "This is harassment, Officer Anderson," she said, and her voice is stable. "I know my rights." Mark got it and came nearer. "Outside, the right is what I'm saying." Grace's keifer was stuck, but she didn't return. Standing just a few meters away, Emily felt an increase in contradictory feelings: fear, anger, an increased sense of responsibility. This was not just a traffic stop, it was much bigger. The tension around the car felt like a storm that had to break. Marks grabbed Grace's arm as he brought her closer to the side of the car. Her bag fell off her shoulders, her contents littered across sidewalk keys, phones, and small notepads. Grace let out a sharp breath, but she kept her still. "This is completely unnecessary," Grace said. Her tone calmed down, but she was controlled. "I held everything you asked." Mark chuckled, crouching down and searching for hers without permission. His movements were deliberately calculated, as if he was looking for something to justify his actions. "What kind of woman like you drive a car like this?" he muttered. Emily comes close. Her hands are clumsy at her side. "Mark, that's not a protocol. There's no reason to search for yours." Mark shook it off and didn't even bother him. "You have a lot to learn, rookie. How to keep the streets clean." Grace's voice hardened. "Officer Anderson, they infringe my rights. They have no reason to search for my property." Grace's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and anger flashing on her face. "It's not mine," she said. "You just planted it in my car." Mark smirked, his expression dripping with a ridiculous laugh. "This is a good story, Miss Williams, but it won't stop." Volume muttered loudly, and her voice was full of distrust. Emily felt a wave of nausea blow over her. She saw Mark planting evidence. She knew it was wrong, but she knew she should say something. But the fear kept her in place. Grace turned her gaze to Emily, her eyes bent. "You saw what he did. Say something." Emily's neck felt tight, and her voice was caught somewhere between her conscience and her fear of retribution. She could feel Mark's eyes on her and dared to comment. "Calm down," his gaze seemed to say. However, Emily was unable to shake a photo of Mark slipping his bag in Grace's car. Her father's words echoed over her head once more. "She's been studying her since she was a child." "Integrity isn't easy, but it makes you a good person." "Mark," Emily and her voice tremble, but you can hear it. "That's not right." Mark curled at her, his face darkened with anger. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please hold your mouth." Grace was loud, her voice despite the anger that ran through it. "You can't threaten to come out. You know exactly what's going to happen here, and your partner too." Mark approached Grace, his hands threatening near his holster. "You drive a nice car, so do you think you're inviolable? Tell me something." "That's enough!" She grabbed Emily Lauder as she intended. Her heart hit her chest, but she never returned. They crossed the line. The crowd has grown now, and the weight of her eyes has been carried by the scene. Mark hesitated and looked around the audience. He collided his chin together, but he said nothing. Grace took a deep breath and looked at Emily. Her voice was calm but firm. "Thank you for talking to me myself, but it's not over." Emily nodded, a spark of resolve flickering across her chest. For the first time, she felt she had the courage to take the position. Mark's face turned to Spapper as he turned his attention to Grace. The crowd was still watching. The calls were increasing and documented every second. He approached her, his voice groaning low only for her ears. "Do you think you're smarter than me? Do you think these people will help you?" Grace hit his glare head. "Officer Anderson, I know I'm smarter than you, and you've made the biggest mistake in your career." Mark cracked for a while, but he quickly hid it with a ridiculous laugh. He pulled out his handcuffs from his belt and headed for Grace. "They are arrested for possession of controlled substances." Emily let out a breath around her neck. This was the moment she had to choose between her career and her conscience. Her father's voice echoed once more. "No," Emily said suddenly, and her voice passed through the tension like a knife. She stepped between Mark and Grace, her hands lifting defensively. "This is not right. You know that?" Mark's face rinsed with anger. "Rookie, so you don't get in the way. Don't let us report disobedience." Emily's voice shaking, but she didn't move. "You planted this evidence. I saw you. I won't take part in it." The crowd flew into the air, a shock wave spreading across the audience. Grace's expression easily became brave, and her eyes closed. "Emily." "Thank you," she said quietly. Mark's anger was killed. He approached Emily and pushed her fingers against her chest. "You're done. Are you listening to me? I'll make sure you never wear the badge again." Emily held her shoulders tight and called out every ounce she had. "If that's what you need to do the right thing, that's it." Feeling that the moment was at his turning point, Grace decides to speak. "Officer Anderson," she said, "you might want to think carefully about your next step," she ordered her voice. Mark laughed terribly. "Oh, is that so? And why?" Grace reached into her jacket pocket and moved slowly and intentionally. Both officers were nervous, but they didn't shrug. She pulled out the leather badge holder, opened it, and announced her login information. "My name is Captain Grace Williams," she said. "I am the new commander of this district." For a while there was nothing but silence. Mark stared at the badge. His mouth opened and closed like a fish from the water. Emily felt the weight of the revelation she had met, and her knees weakened. "That's impossible," he said. His self-confidence was falling apart. I slapped Mark. You can't." Grace interrupted him. "You didn't even ask yourself before you decided I was a criminal, right? But that shouldn't be important who I am. Everyone deserves no one to respect and judge the skin and color of the car they drive." Mark's face faded as the crowd broke out in a tweet. Some cheered. Others called him angry. The reality of what he did seemed to have been exposed. Emily retreated a bit, and her heart retreated. Grace turned to her, her expression softening. "Officer Carter, I'm grateful that you found the courage to comment. It's not easy, but it's the right thing." Emily swallowed badly, her voice trembling. "I should have done that early. Sorry." Grace nodded, a weak smile on her lips. "When it was important, you did it. That's important." Still shocked, Mark finally found his voice. "Captain, I can explain it." "No," Grace cut him down sharply. "You can't do that. What you did today is violating everything this badge represents. Give us a gun and a badge. You will be stopped immediately and will be effective immediately." Mark's hands trembled when he wasn't explaining his badge and his holster. He stared at Grace, his face twisting with anger and disbelief. "You can't do that. You don't know how it's here. I've been protecting these cities for 20 years. Grace's representation did not change. "Protection? Do you call it? How many lives have you destroyed with your prejudice, Mark? How many people have framed to feed your ego?" The crowd that Grace is currently presenting began screaming for justice. The woman cried out in front of him, "You're sorry about uniforms." Another addition, "We've been dealing with it for years." Emily frayed her nerves as she saw the growing crowd. It was no longer about the mark. It was about the system of how civil servants would do to him uncontrollable. Grace came, and her voice was wearing a weight that silenced the sound. "I'm not the only one," Grace said. "It's about putting people like him accountable. It's about ensuring that no one, even those who have sworn to maintain it, is beyond the law." Mark's face diminished as he approached the Grace. "Do you think you're a kind of hero? I don't know what it's like to deal with real criminals here. They sit behind the desk while I risk my life." Grace raised her eyebrows. Her gentle appearance was unshakable. "And do you think the planting of evidence is justified? Do you use your authority to threaten and undermine innocent people? You don't risk your life, Mark. You ruin others." Emily felt her breasts bring when she saw the exchange. She always knew there was a crack in the system, but seeing her was overwhelming. Grace turned her attention to Emily, her voice softening. "Officer Carter," said Grace, "I know it's not easy for you, but the upset I have today has inspired me. Don't lose it." Emily nodded slowly, her voice barely in a whisper. "I'm not going." Mark, still holding the badge, saw Grace in a mixture of res and despair. "You make a mistake, Captain, so you don't hold it for too long in this job." Grace approached, her eyes closed to him. People like me? Do you mean my people who believe in justice? Who believes in equality? If that's a mistake, I'd be happy to do it. The crowd erupted as applause clapped. Their voices protested. Grace turned to the next audience and said, "Thank you for recording this. Make sure it's shared." Mark's face twisted his anger. "Throw me onto the optics bus. It's all a show." Grace did not struggle. "No, Mark. This is accountability, something you obviously don't understand." The approaching siren's howling became larger, indicating the arrival of the backup. Grace stood magnificently, but her presence took command when Mark reluctantly handed over his badge and his holster. His shoulders sagged together, and his courage collapsed under the weight of what had just happened. Emily saw a storm of emotions that changed her relief, guilt, feelings of hope that she hadn't felt in years. As another police car went on, two police officers escaped from the eyes between the crowd and the scene in front of them. Grace wheeled her around, making her voice clear. "Officer, I'll escort Mr. Anderson to the district. He will be suspended until full review." Mark's face has changed to a deeper red shadow. "You can't be serious. This is my team in my district." Grace didn't even look at him when he replied, "No more." The crowd cheered as the staff reluctantly left. Some people sought support for Grace, while others demanded countless people who have been wrong over the years. Grace turned the crowd, and her voice rose above the noise. "This is just the beginning," she said. Her tone was determined. "Today, we are against corruption and prejudice. But that doesn't stop here. It's up to us all to demand a duty of accountability and ensure that our system works for everyone." The crowd responded to a wave of applause and agreement. Emily realized the size of the moment and felt her partner around her neck. It wasn't just blessings and marks. It was about the community that conquered their trust in those they should protect. As the scene began to relax, Grace Emily approached, her expression softened. "You did the right thing today," she said. "I know it wasn't easy." Emily nodded, her voice barely heard. "I was scared. I didn't know if I'd lose everything." Grace placed a calming hand on Emily's shoulder. "You're not losing anything. Integrity does not define us a badge." Emily blinked tears, feeling pride that she hadn't felt since the first part of her strength. For the first time, she realized what it means to truly serve and protect. A local news crew arrived, and the cameras were already lying around. Grace took in the deep air and knew the spotlight would look brighter than ever before. She turned to the camera, her voice calm but firm. "What happened here today is the memory of no one standing in law. Not even the one who forces them, not even the one who forces them," she said. "We still have a longer journey than we do, but change starts at that moment." As the crew conquered all the words, Emily retreated and led Grace. She saw the crowd and now distributed herself, but left a touch of hope and determination. For Emily, this was the beginning of a new chapter in which she could ultimately do justice to the vows she took. For Mercy, it was a chance to convert a broken system from within. And for the community, it was a spark that could spark a bigger move for justice. The sirens faded into the distance when Mark's police car disappeared in the street. Grace and Emily stood side by side, ready to face what came next.